So we're diving into the story of Manjiro, this young Japanese fisherman who ends up in 19th century America. Talk about a culture shock, right?
Absolutely, and his story is amazing. I mean, it really gets us thinking about, like, cultural expectations, identity, belonging, all that deep stuff.
Yeah. And what's interesting is it goes beyond just the surface level. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not just about different food or clothes.
Exactly. It gets at something way more fundamental about how these two cultures, Japan and America, operated at their core.
Okay, so let's jump into it. One of the things that really stuck with me was his fascination with clocks. And like, we're talking about a grown man here, not a kid seeing a cool toy for the first time. What's your take on that?
You know, it's funny you should mention the clocks because that little detail, it's incredibly telling. It really speaks to a fundamental difference in how Japanese and American cultures of that time thought about time itself.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
So imagine a world where tradition and these cyclical patterns, they dictated the rhythm of life for like centuries. That was Manjiro's Japan. And then, boom, he's dropped into America, a nation completely obsessed with progress, where you've got clocks literally ticking away the minutes, pushing everyone towards the future.
Wow, yeah. It's like the faster pace of life, that becomes a character in his story.
Exactly. That underlying tension between these two different ways of experiencing time, it informs so much of Manjiro's journey.
It's so true. And it's not just clocks, is it? I mean, he's trying to dress like the Americans. He's going to church. He's like going all in on immersing himself in this new world.
And I think that's such an important point to remember. Manjiro isn't resisting this new culture. He's not pushing back. He's actively, almost eagerly trying to adapt. He wants to fit in, even if it means questioning everything he thought he knew.
Right, right. He's searching for his place, you know? But we know this deep dive isn't just about maple syrup and trying on new clothes.
Mhm.
Things take a bit of a turn, don't they?
Yeah, that's where Manjiro's attempts to fit in, to find his place, they
Yeah.
backfire. And it happens in a way that really exposes the deep contradictions within American society at that time.
You're talking about that church incident, right?
Yeah.
It's honestly hard to imagine a starker example of that clash between ideals and reality.
Mm.
So we've got this young man, he's dressed in his Sunday best, genuinely trying to participate,
Yeah.
and then he's approached by the church elders.
And you would think, right, that in a place of worship, a supposed sanctuary of compassion and acceptance, things would be different.
Right.
But sadly, that wasn't the reality for many, including Manjiro. We have to remember this is 19th century America, a nation still grappling with the legacy of slavery and the deeply ingrained prejudice of the time.
And that's where this incident gets really unsettling. The church elders, they approach Manjiro and suggest that he would be more comfortable with the black congregants
Yeah.
in the segregated pew.
Let's just be very clear here. This is a blatant example of racism. And it exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of American society at that time. This nation that was founded on ideals of equality, yet practicing segregation within a house of worship. It's really something else.
It's awful. And for Manjiro, someone so new to this society, trying so hard to understand the rules, to be accepted and to be met with this.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. You start to think about the emotional turmoil he must have been going through.
It makes you wonder, like, how did he even process that?
Exactly.
This is where I think Manjiro's internal struggle becomes even more profound, because here he is, he's wrestling with his Japanese identity in this new American context. He sees the prejudice, the inequality, and it forces him to confront this gap between the ideals he's presented with and the harsh realities of his experience.
Absolutely. And before we get deeper into Manjiro's head, there's another character we have to talk about. Mrs. Whitfield, she's there, she sees this exchange in the church, and her reaction, well, let's just say it's not a passive one.
And it's remarkable, Mrs. Whitfield's response to this whole situation.
It's amazing.
It really is. She doesn't stay quiet.
She doesn't try to pretend it didn't happen.
No way. Instead, she tackles the whole thing head on.
Yeah, she hears what the church elders are suggesting, right? And she's just like, ridiculous.
I love that.
Which is not something you'd expect anyone to say back then, let alone a woman to church elders. She must have been stewing on this, waiting for a chance to let loose.
Oh, totally. And the thing is, she doesn't stop there. She goes right at her husband, the captain, about it.
Right. That part where she's like, why should there be a separate pew for colored people?
Yeah.
In a place of worship, honestly.
It's incredible. She's not just sticking up for Manjiro in that moment. She's challenging the whole idea of segregation.
And what I think is so cool is that she connects this to something so much bigger. It's not just about Manjiro being uncomfortable. It's about the whole fight for abolition for equal rights for everyone. She's seeing the larger context.
Totally. She's part of this whole movement pushing for real change. And her words, they plant this powerful seed in Manjiro's mind. Think about it. Here's this young man from a society where you didn't question authority. And now he's seeing this woman challenging the status quo in a way he's probably never even imagined.
It's like she's showing him a completely different way to exist in this world, one where you don't just accept injustice. And then comes that question, the one that I think gets to the heart of his entire story. Are you going to get up and help the world change?
Whoa, that question from Mrs. Whitfield at that moment, it's huge. I mean, think about it. In Manjiro's world, change happens slowly over generations. And now suddenly there's this idea that Manjiro could be part of making change happen, that he could help shape the future. It's a lot to take in.
For sure. It's like a door just swung wide open, showing him this whole new way of seeing the world and his place in it. But of course, it's not like a straight shot from there, is it? He's still got so much to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where those parts of the source material about Manjiro's inner thoughts, they're so insightful. Remember how he's making these lists of all the differences between America and Japan?
Yeah.
It's not just him being curious anymore. It's about him trying to reconcile these two sides of himself.
Like he's trying to find his place in this new world, but also hold on to his own identity, his past.
Exactly. He's juggling so much.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how we all navigate these kinds of tensions in our own lives.
It reminds me of that part where he's talking about how differently Americans and Japanese view things like work and leisure, like what it even means to relax.
Oh, that's such a good example. He's noticing how Americans, they're working all the time, driven by this need for progress and profit. And then he contrasts that with the Japanese perspective, where work and leisure were more integrated, where there's beauty and meaning found in even simple everyday tasks.
And it's clear he's struggling with those different approaches, trying to figure out where he fits in.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about work either. He's also trying to make sense of the social hierarchy here, the way Americans show wealth and status. It's so different.
Sort of in your face, right?
Totally. He comes from this society with a very rigid class system. And then he's in America, the so-called land of opportunity. And he's seeing the inequality and the struggles people are facing.
Yeah, and he's seeing it all through this very specific lens, too. I mean, he's living with Captain Whitfield, who represents a certain level of privilege and power.
Yeah.
And yet, even within that household, even being associated with the captain's wealth, Manjiro is constantly reminded that he's different.
That's othered.
Exactly. And I think that constant tension, that push and pull between belonging and exclusion, it's something we can all relate to. He wants to embrace this new world, but he also knows he doesn't quite fit in. And it's not always by choice.
It makes you think about how much pressure there is to conform, to erase those parts of ourselves that make us unique.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to that moment in the church. His response, when they tell him he should sit with the black congregants, he says, I don't mind sitting there, especially if it will make people happier. He's so ready to make himself small, just to avoid conflict, to try to belong.
It breaks your heart because you can see how much he's internalizing this message, that he's the problem, that just being himself is a burden.
It's so tough. And that's why I think Mrs. Whitfield's response is so important. She refuses to let him believe that. She sees how dangerous it is for him to accept that kind of treatment.
She's like, no way, you deserve respect. Your voice matters.
She's like, listen, you deserve respect. What you have to say matters.
Exactly. It's not about making other people comfortable. It's about him recognizing his own worth, his own right to be treated with respect and dignity.
It's such a powerful moment. And it makes you realize how crucial it is to have people in our lives who challenge us, who push us to be better, to see our own value.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, that's what makes Manjiro's story resonate so strongly even today. He goes from this young man shaped by a culture steeped in tradition to someone who starts to see the world and himself in it completely differently.
He's like, wait a minute. There's a whole other way of looking at things.
Right. He's exposed to new ideas, new possibilities. He sees the good and the bad of American society, the advancements, the drive for progress, but also the inequality, the injustice. And it forces him to confront these huge questions about who he is, where he belongs, what kind of world he wants to live in.
Big question.
The biggest, and you can see this evolution in his writing too, the way he starts to analyze and question the world around him. He's not just observing anymore, he's wrestling with these complicated issues that we're still dealing with today.
It's true. And you know what I find so inspiring about Manjiro? He reminds us that change is possible. That growth, real growth often comes from discomfort, from those times when we have to confront our own biases, our own assumptions, and embrace new perspectives.
He's like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes, Exactly. He shows us that even when things are tough, we have a choice. We can either sit back and watch, or we can step up and try to make a difference.
And it's not about having all the answers or knowing exactly what that change should look like. It's about being open to new ideas,
Yeah.
having the guts to ask tough questions, to challenge the way things are, and to imagine a better future.
Just like Manjiro challenged himself to learn from a culture so different from his own, to embrace new ideas and new ways of being. His story is a powerful reminder that even the smallest encounters, like his thing with the clocks or his observations about making bread, can reveal these profound truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
It's those little details that often hold the most meaning. And ultimately, Manjiro's journey is a testament to the power of human resilience, adaptability, and this deep desire we all have to connect with others, to find our place in the world, and to make a difference.
So much to think about. It makes you wonder, what seemingly small cultural differences have you encountered that revealed something much bigger? How might those experiences like Manjiro's inspire us to be catalysts for positive change in our own lives and in the world around us?